Hello, I'm Jim Miller. I'm here with Reggie Turner and Andy Overton. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. Well, Governor Larry Hogan has got himself a book. Reggie, what say you?
I say Governor Hogan is clearly showing his ambitions for higher office, and this is the normal path for that in his introduction to a broader audience, and he's using his popularity in the state to kind of further his agenda to be able to do so.
Okay. Andy?
So what happens when you write a book? You go on a book tour.
Okay.
And then you get to talk to a lot of different people in a lot
all
of different places.
States, right.
And not saying it's an excuse, but it's an opportunity to see individuals who he normally wouldn't be talking to.
So in about 2 years, we can expect a fishing trip in New Hampshire, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or it'll be the best kept non-secret out there. So
yeah,
be released.
Interesting. So, I mean, interestingly, he seems to have lost some of his Republican base. He is certainly, can we agree that he's a moderate? Is that a fair statement?
I mean, compared to what's happening now, sure. I mean, there's a lot of people who are moderates I may not have categorized as moderate 4 years ago, but
okay.
Sure, yeah.
Has he done himself a favor by distancing himself from Donald Trump?
You know, only time will tell that. For Maryland, sure, yeah, maybe. But I think he's trying to stick to his morals while standing on both sides of a red line and being able to please a lot of people all at once. And at some point in time, is going to have to take a major stand. And that may come on this book tour. We'll see.
So this talks about his life, his battle with cancer, a number of other things. I thought it was interesting that it failed to mention his first national race back in the, when was that, in the 80s or 90s, congressional seat, is that
Early
true?
90s maybe?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Reggie?
Well, I think this book was to highlight the human side of him that everyone connected to that drove him to his win, and also to kind of highlight the things that he thinks that would resonate in the environment that we're in. I mean, he is clearly saying he's the moderate and kind of teeing up the conversation for what he believes it's going to look like in the future. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out. You know, it's funny, if you look in the state, he's lost a lot of the Republican base with the reopening of Maryland, so that's been a challenge for him. And then on the left, you have issues in regards to the line in Baltimore and some of the other issues that come to the table. So I guess if you're hated from both sides, you can call yourself a moderate.
Okay, okay. You know, it's interesting to me thinking about historically, you know, we had President Obama for 8 years, and then the country saw its way clear to shift to a Republican. We've seen that happen several times, maybe with the exception of after Ronald Reagan, they elected George H.W. Bush for 4 years. I'm not sure, assuming if Donald Trump wins, I'm not sure 2024 is going to be a good year to be a Republican trying to get back into politics. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I think it's going to be tough to be a Republican not following the Trump brand, period. Because the other side is, if Republicans lose, that more than likely means that they're going to get wiped out in congressional races as well, so there'll need to be a remaking of the party.
I agree with that, but I guess in my mind, is Trump a blip? Is there a Trump brand that will be long-term?
I think it really depends on November 3rd or the 2 weeks afterwards. You know, before COVID, I think that we all may have had different opinions. I think COVID has really turned our world in a way upside down. It has shown inequality and inequity in ways that we've never seen before, and our leaders have to start dealing with that. And I think that is something that has been put on the president's plate, and we'll see how things work out. Yeah, maybe it's a brand. It's whether the United States and the citizens are going to accept that brand or not. And that's the big test. And frankly, if anyone says to you right now, oh, I know who's going to win that election, they're lying. It is an up and down race.
For the presidency?
100%.
Yeah,
I do.
I would
There's
agree.
a lot of time between now and then. There really is. And as we even saw in the news cycle today, literally anything can happen.
Yeah. I heard one of the Republican pundits speaking today that the difference between the Democratic convention and the Republican convention was that the Democrats were just happy that their guy made it through a 30-minute speech without making a gaffe. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, can Donald Trump do that?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. I mean, if we're talking gaffe potential here, I don't think there probably is whether you like him or don't like him. I think that's a settled fact.
Well, let's define what gaffe is. Some people think that he's just being him. Some other individuals think there are actual issues with the manner and what he says and the way he talks. So you have to define that word first. And I think that's kind of the playing point.
Is anyone surprised that Hogan didn't challenge Trump this year?
I think if more would have came out of the impeachment, Hogan had put himself in position to be able to do so. I think that with the results of that impeachment, as they were, as mild as they were, it allowed him to just stand down and say, I'm going to wait.
Okay.
I think if Larry Hogan can run right now, he would.
Yeah.
But that's not going to get him on any tickets in states. So I think the timing was just weird. But I agree completely.
Yeah.
The impeachment hearings and what came out of that, I think, held him back until the next cycle.
And the good news for Larry Hogan is, even if he doesn't make a run for president, even if he's unsuccessful, this book will line his pockets, I'm sure, for the rest of his life. Okay, that's all we have on that one. Stay with us. We're back after this commercial break. Welcome back. So more stories from Portland this week. Police precinct was set on fire during a Portland protest. Authorities declare it a riot. How do you define it, Andy?
I define it as obviously violent protests. And I think that folks are angry and upset. Do we torch buildings? No, that's not what we want to accomplish. But you know, when you have peaceful protests that don't work, people can't take a knee. What else at some point does someone feel like they're going to do? I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying I understand possibly the frustration behind it. There has to be an outlet. That's not it, but we've got to have an outlet.
That's a very good point. What's your take on it, Reggie?
First, I believe the population of African Americans in Portland is about 10%. So okay. I'm struck by this violence and everything that's going on. If you look at the pictures, there are not many people that look like me that are perpetuating the violence. And you have, groups from the left and groups from the right, and there are fights between the two. And I'm not sure what they're actually fighting over, because it's drifted so far away from the message of the Black Lives Matter movement or any of the social inequalities that we've been talking about. This just seems like a breeding ground for violence at this point.
Yeah, I saw a video on YouTube or somewhere, and it was a news outlet that had shown this video, but it was homegrown video, and it essentially showed an African American guy at what was a peaceful protest that was about to turn violent, and he and some of his friends essentially stood between the people that wanted to be violent and one of the local retail establishments and says, no, that's not what we're about. Mm-hmm. And you hope people would do that type of thing, because I think it really hurts the message when it turns violent. And I believe, and maybe you were trying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but at some level I think, to your point of there weren't many people that look like you at that, I think there's a class of people, unfortunately, that will show up for these protests, whether or not they're for the protest. They want to start the violence.
Sure.
And they see this as an opportunity to loot and just do bad things.
Sure, and the important message is to keep that message from the very beginning of what protesting is and why folks are protesting and not align it with violent acts and measures. Because if you do have outsiders coming in trying to throw that hateful violence around, it has nothing to do with the message itself. And we've got to do, I think, a better job in our media and in our talking to be able to segregate that from the true message of what's really happening in the country.
So I want to go back to a point that you brought up earlier, and that is, what is their outlet?
Mm-hmm.
What is their outlet?
Yeah. You know, it's tough, and I think that, you know, if folks continue to push the right message, what BLM stands for, what inequality and inequity in this country and in Portland and in cities across America are, it's hard to keep that focus when you're continually pushed to the side. But we have to. And I think we have to come together as communities and promote that message more than any burning, more than any violent protests. We have to continue to push the message forward. And it's tough. And it's going to take 4 steps backwards to take 5 steps forward. Yet we must continue.
All right. Reggie, opinion on the outlet?
You know, on the outlet, it's very tough because, you know, there was a point during COVID where everyone's ears were open to the conversation in regards to social injustice and things that are going on. And then there becomes a fatigue where people have heard enough and they want to shut the conversation down. So now you see, well, people are trying to tag violence like this as the movement. And no, that's not the movement. And it's really squelching the voices of talking about the social things that we really need to rectify in this country. And it's a sad state of affairs that you can see political parties and those that have other interests that are pointing the finger at the violence to not being able to talk about the real issues, and that's just concerning.
They're saying, "See, I told you so. This is
right.
This is how this is going to end up." And again, if my theory is correct, probably some portion, if not a large portion, of those that are creating the violence don't really care about the true issue. They just want to create the violence.
Right.
From a law enforcement standpoint, and not getting into defunding the police, although we can if you want to talk about that, what's the reaction? I mean, we've seen everything from, you know, take them down hard, to, hey, we're going to give you these couple of blocks and you do what you want, which didn't work out very well, by the way. What is the right response?
I'm not sure what the right response is, but Portland doesn't have it right. I mean, Portland is in chaos, in my opinion. I just think that if you cannot squelch the violence, it's going to ruin any messaging that is coming for those who are looking for authentic change.
From a media standpoint, and you know, we talk a lot in this country, if you listen to the right, they'll say that, you know, the fake news and all of that. How should the media be covering this? I mean, we don't have, in my view, this is my opinion, there's not a lot of fact-based news anymore. It's all these opinion jockeys, whether on the left or on the right. Mm-hmm. And Reggie, I think you and I talked at one point that, you know, if you look at, the hope would be if you look at MSNBC on one side and Fox on the other side, somewhere in the middle is the reality. But there's not even the same story on those two channels. What is the media contributing to the problem, or is the media helping the problem?
I would say for me, especially during election season, it's been typical for me to not watch much television, because I know that in the media cycles, as far as I can remember, especially during a presidential election period, it's seeking to stoke the worst in us. You're not seeing the good stories there. So I've tried to stay away from that personally, but obviously I'm reading and I'm paying attention to things, and I'm still catching things in my peripheral. But I think the media plays a very important role, and it almost seems as if the media is glorifying the violence. You know, so you see it, and that becomes the norm, right? That's what's, you know, that's the expectation of what's going to happen when there's a protest, and that part is unfortunate.
Yeah, that video that I talked about of the young black man and his friends standing in front of the building and saying, no, we're not going to do this. You didn't see that on CNN. You didn't see it on MSNBC. You didn't see it on Fox or name any other news outlet. What's your opinion on it?
You know, I think that there's more than CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. I think there are somewhat reputable media outlets. So yes, they're going to show the violence, but until our media can also show the good right next to it, I think there is a wavering to one side. So it's really up to sometimes the American people, for most times, to look at the facts and to really take a deeper dive. You've really got to do a little research sometimes. Is that the way it should be? Maybe not, but it's the way it is.
Well, I think it is the way it should be. I think that it's a sad testament to our union if we take what we read on Facebook or anywhere else at face value.
Yeah, media is not Facebook. I'm talking about more reputable journalistic
I got to tell you, again, the conversation I heard on the right-wing side of radio today, I'd sat in the car shaking my head because I didn't have any basis for that reality, and I've seen the same thing on the left-hand side as well. So I think we have to get our own facts.
Sure, there is, but you've got to have a starting point someplace, right? And I think that's what journalism is to bring information to people. Now, the manner in which you spin that one way or the other is the part I'm taking a little bit of a contention with, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's the part you always have to dig in. But you're right, I don't have enough time in my day to do the journalistic investigative reporting that I may get from other news sources. What I can do is respond, react in a way that allows me to do more research and do a little bit more analysis into what's really being said and to get the deeper dive in the deeper issue. Once I do that, I can make my own opinions from that.
What are your thoughts about some of these organizations like PolitiFact and Snopes and I can't remember all of the rest of them that theoretically are giving the fact-based, true, not true, partially true? What are your thoughts about those?
I think there's a place for something like that. Do I believe everything that I read off the internet on Snopes or PolitiFact? No, I don't. But if I can tell the difference between what a fact is and what an opinion is.
Right.
And I think that's part of our ability to say, that doesn't seem too right. Let me go to the data. Let me see how you perpetuated that data into your own narrative, and I want to know what that is. Now, not everybody has time for that. And I think that when you get a false or a mostly true on Snopes, okay, maybe, but at least it'll give me more of an in-depth analysis of what that data and where they get that information from, and then I can make my own opinion. I think it's a jumping off board.
If you could have the police do one thing differently based on what you've seen, if you could have the media do one thing differently based on what you've seen, if you could have the protesters do one thing differently, what would that be? And you don't have to say for all three, but is there anything that stands out to you to say, wow, I'd really like to see this?
Yeah, the first two is to acknowledge the bias. We all have it, and it's integrated into our culture. And I think that if someone says systematic racism is not a thing, I call the red flag on that. That's just simply not true. And I think for our protesters, I think what we have to understand is that this is not going to happen overnight. We cannot sensationalize a culture shift in 401 plus years and make that happen before the 2020 election. This is a culture shift that has to happen over decades, which means folks have to continually push their narrative and make sure that we make real change and not just a news story at the bottom of CNN. And I think that's the hard thing to swallow. This isn't going to happen overnight. We're not going to see change overnight, complete change. We're going to see increments. And we have to be satisfied with that because we have to keep going.
Reggie, how about you?
I know newsrooms are being condensed, but more investigative journalism. More of telling the story behind the story. We can sensationalize the events of today, but there's not much of a historical context given to how we got here today. And going back to your point in regards to Facebook and the role that Facebook plays, the one thing that I will give Facebook credit for is live streams.
Sure.
Because you can go and see on the ground what's happening.
You can.
And it's really not about who's narrating it. You can see for yourself, and you can
draw your own opinion.
You can draw your own opinion. You can look at a few different live streams of an event and something that's happening in a community and get a better sense of what's happening. But You know, it's tough, but in regards to the news, it's always the sensationalized headlines. But there's not a look underneath the hood in regards to a historical context of how we've got here. And it's definitely not going to be anything that's going to help us change if it continues the way that it is.
So I agree with you, and I agree with you, and I hate when that happens. But my one thing is just a little bit different. And actually it pulls on a point that you made earlier, and that is the fact that we never see the good with the bad. Yeah. We never see that video I talked about where the kids were standing in front and saying, this is not going to happen.
I saw that video, yeah.
I think that we need to, I think the media needs to take that responsibility. I think the police need to be more transparent that the people, in some cases, the people that are causing this violence are not there to support the mission. They're there to cause the violence. So those are my two pieces. Unfortunately, I don't think good news makes people watch TV.
Good news doesn't sell.
Right, doesn't sell ads. And at the end of the day, it's follow the money just like everything else in life. I'll take the last word on that. Coming up next, vote by mail. Good thing, bad thing, don't know? We'll have the pros and cons when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. So there's a big debate in this country about elections and whether they should be completely mail-based, whether they should be a hybrid where we have some precincts open and some mail, whether they should be just what we have done in the past. Where are we on this as a panel? Andy, let's start with you.
I think the more opportunity we have for people to vote in this country is a good thing. And I think that if you want to open up every polling place and have mail-in ballots, I'm in complete support of that. I want to make it easier but safe and reliable for people to cast their vote. My mother is 74 years old. She cannot stand in the lines that I stood in 2008 for 4.5 hours. She simply physically can't do it. She's been an absentee voter for 20 years. And I think that has to be an opportunity for folks who can stand in the middle of a voting line, because we may be working 2 or 3 jobs. And if it means I don't vote because I have to work or I have to get my kids, or my kids can't stand in line, or voting, bring me an absentee ballot, bring me a mail-in ballot. Let me do what I'm here to do, vote.
Okay. What say you, Reggie?
I'm with Andy. Every opportunity that we have to safely vote, I'm on board with. You know, I grew up in a rural community where there were not long lines to stand, and you know, my grandmother, even into her 90s, she was one of the first people at the polling place to vote. Voting has always been important to me. It's been expressed, and down through my family, and I think our vote is very important. It's just that we're in a climate now where this has been heavily politicized, as opposed to it looking at it as all Americans should have the opportunity to vote, and we should have, in the greatest country in the world, we should have every opportunity to vote, and we should have systems in place that can securely protect the vote.
And that, I think, is the next key. And you made several points there that I want to flush out a little bit. First of all, about the fact that we should, this has been heavily politicized. In 2013, 2014, there were 42 bills introduced that had to do with vote-by-mail elections. Did you hear any news coverage on them?
Of course not.
No.
None.
No.
Why are you hearing it today? Because it's been politicized. It's now a political, hot potato, and we're going to use it for all it's worth. 22 states allow certain elections to be conducted entirely by mail. And that's not this year, that's historically, or for some level of history. The politicizing of this process is, again, I just don't understand it. And the only people that are worse than, in my view, than the media at trying to beat each other up are the politicians. It's not about what they're for. I think sometimes it's about beating up the other guy.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So, how do we depoliticize this, Andy?
Oh, if I had that answer, I'd be
You
a
wouldn't be
millionaire.
sitting
Yeah,
here.
I'd for sure. I don't know how to depoliticize this, but I think that because it involves our elections, and I think there's some deep-seated, under-rooted ideas that have nothing to do with casting a ballot. I think there's some gerrymandering happening. I think there's prohibitive voting. In other words, trying to prohibit people from voting. It's occurring. If it wasn't, Stacey Abrams wouldn't have a job right now in her nonprofit. So I think that we have to battle those things, and that's really what I think this is about. I don't think anybody would stand up and say, I don't think Americans should vote. I think every American should vote. The manner in which we do, I don't think it should matter, as long as it's safe. And until someone can get behind that message fully, we're going to continually politicize this, and they're going to use it, politicians, to help their base and to rile things up. And that's not a good thing. We should be working together. If there's one thing we can come together as Americans, is the idea that everyone should be able to vote. And if we can't do that, I'm worried.
Yeah. You mentioned gerrymandering. And you know, there's been a lot of talk in Maryland, and I will fully agree that some of the districts in Maryland, including our own,
That's right.
are gerrymandered. And they're gerrymandered in favor of Democrats.
That's right.
But you know what? If you go look at a Republican-controlled state, guess how they're gerrymandered there? Mm-hmm. So this is an equal opportunity sin.
Oh, I agree.
For both political parties.
That's right.
Let's talk about the security piece. One person, one vote. Mm-hmm. How do we make that happen when we have these, that's the concern that I have over the hybrid model. Mm. How do we make that happen? Because the other thing that we stand on as a country is that you don't have to tell me how you vote.
Right.
I don't have to tell you how I vote.
Right.
So how does that work?
Well, ask Colorado. They've been doing it for how long? Ask our military members who are overseas. They've been doing it for how long?
I guess my point is, if someone wanted to cheat, mm-hmm. and I'm saying they do, if
right.
they wanted to cheat, is there more potential when you have a hybrid or a fully vote by mail solution?
Less than something like 1% of all votes cast have been considered faulty or fraudulent. I'll take those numbers. I'm from Nevada. That's a betting game. I win every day on that bet. And I think that if 22 states have figured this out, I cannot imagine we can't implement something very similar across the country. So instead of saying the rest of the states we should not be doing this, let's model the things that work. And if they're working, and it's proven to be working, why not adopt that?
Best practices.
Best practices.
Okay. Reggie?
No, I agree with that. We should be having the best practices so that we can make sure that all Americans are having the opportunity to participate, and especially in this election cycle, in regards to kind of what we're dealing with the health challenges in regards to COVID. It's interesting to me though that the politics are in the way, and obviously it's not going to get solved this election cycle. But the temperature of the country is going to have to change before I believe we can solve a lot of these major issues.
Yeah. We have talked on this show before about the fact that there has been an entire paradigm shift in this country as a result of COVID. All right? Companies that said, we will never have work from home employees. Guess what they've got today?
And it's working.
And it's working. Mm-hmm. What event needs to happen? What is going to be the catalyst for us to have that kind of paradigm shift so that we can all get on the same page and really, and you could say about this, you could say about, how is it a popular vote that decides the election, or are we going to continue as we have? There's any number of these issues. How does that paradigm shift occur? Who can start that? Yeah,
you're talking about a huge culture shift, and if anybody who ever has tried to change a culture, it's like turning a huge ship left. It's slow and methodical, and it doesn't happen in one day. I think we have to take tiny bites at each area and start making progress, because if we don't even try, then all we're doing is going backwards. So how do you change that paradigm? How do you change that culture? Very slowly. And little by little, and it's agile, right? Because what's happening now may be completely different after COVID, maybe in a couple months. Not that COVID's going away, but we're going to start to see how we can operate under a stay-at-home or a quarantine order. Because if we don't, businesses will close. So the ones who are agile, and possibly, not all, but some who were able to work within those conditions have thrived. And I think business, economy, I think education, we're going to have to start to see that traditional methods that we've used before are not going to work anymore, because folks got this taste. And I think that this thinking outside the box is going to continue, and we're going to have to get on the boat. We're going to have to turn left, change that culture, because this isn't going to stop after COVID. Yeah. We've got the taste.
Reggie, thoughts?
I think of organizations on a large scale that have been able to change on a dime and create a safe environment for their workforce, and it will be the NBA. You know, the way they were able to create their bubble and the time that they took during COVID to be able to do that with not having outbreaks. And
Zero reported cases, correct?
Right. So you start looking at that as a model, and then you go, well, how can that be done on smaller scales and different things of that nature? Now, there's some challenges with what the NBA has done. I mean, you're not able to see your families right now, right? You're just in a bubble on a nice resort with the guys playing basketball, so that can't be too bad. But from a large scale, you know, they took the best recommendation of the doctors and the scientists and technology and brought it all together in this one location to be able to keep that league going. And
really, that's the key. They took the best recommendations of the scientists and technology, and they made that happen. You're right, the NBA is just, there's going to be case studies on this in business for decades to come. And Major League Baseball is actually thinking of doing the same thing next year.
Right.
And so it's working, and that's the whole deal. And I think we have to listen to those experts, true experts, because if the NBA can do it, you're right. Let's duplicate that model, just like Colorado, just like mail-in voting. Just saying.
Yeah. You know, some talk about specifically around the Electoral College versus popular vote. Some talk about a constitutional amendment. Is that even possible in these days? Can you imagine? I mean, how many times has it been tried here in the last 30, 40 years, and has it ever even gotten close? Is that even an option anymore, to amend the Constitution? Can we get everybody in this country to line up in that straight a line to make that happen? I wonder about that.
I'm going to say yes, because I am an optimist.
Okay.
I know as a realist, though, that in this Congress, yeah, probably not, but I think that there must be, yes, because I believe in America, I believe in democracy, and I believe that if you want to change the Constitution, you have to work really hard at it. You know, women's right to vote, hello, Women's Equality Day today, you know, didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen easy, and it didn't happen without blood, sweat, and tears. So I cannot imagine that another constitutional amendment or a change isn't going to be the same process. But I'm an optimist. But, so yeah, I think it can. Why not?
Reggie?
I'm trying to see past the fog of the environment that we're in.
Yes, sir.
So short term, no. Long term, right. Yes. Because I believe the demographics of our country are rapidly changing. So that's going to change decision makers and thought process of how the country moves forward.
I think the demographics are rapidly changing too, and I think, though I do have some concerns, I think that could be a good thing. I don't think racism is something we're born with. And I think that while it still exists, I think it hopefully is less than what it was a generation ago. And you know, if we continue to shrink that population, does it eventually go away? You look at gay marriage and what President Clinton said, and you know, and those types of things, and now it's commonplace, and everybody says, oh yeah, and the churches are even saying, you know, hey, we can have the Lutheran, for example, said, hey, we can have a committed, you know, a committed relationship between the same sex, and that's okay.
Yet there are still states here that can deny me an apartment because of me and my girlfriend or my wife.
Yeah.
So yes, maybe we have taken some strides.
It's not perfect.
It's
not close to perfect.
But I'm not sure I would go so far to say that your statement earlier that racism is shrinking. I don't know about that. I don't think it's my call to make, actually. But I think that the systematic oppression has been so ingrained, I don't think we've even really touched the tip of it yet. And I think that's going to come up and it's going to bubble. And that's the only way we're going to be able to move this country forward is if we recognize it, see it, and find solutions past it. I think you're just seeing the rising of how we're going to bring this to the forefront. I don't think it's shrinking.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. I don't have any hard facts to prove my point. I guess my hope is that it's shrinking. But as you said, none of this is going to happen overnight. This is a thing that's going to happen over multiple generations.
We have work to do.
We have a lot of work to do. And we have a lot of work to do here on the flip side, too. Coming up next, we're going to have Fast Five. Stay with us. Welcome to Fast Five, where our three panelists talk about 5, in this case 6 topics, in 7 short minutes. Maybe we should call it Fast 6. But let's get started. Maryland State Song celebrates the Confederacy, and U.S. Representative Jamie Raskin has got an optional state song. Reggie, what do you say?
I'm sure this is going to be a hot political issue. I just hope that not too much time is spent on this in Annapolis, because in the midst of COVID and everything that we're dealing with, I'm not a big fan of symbolic gestures. If they change the state song, I'm okay with that, but there's some serious issues that I think they need to tend to in Annapolis.
Oh man, I couldn't have said that better.
Yeah, agreed. With that said, it's always great to bring any kind of racism or inequality to the forefront, but you're right. Let's acknowledge it, move on, and start solving the problems of this country.
We've got some real honest-to-God problems to solve.
That's right.
Let's not spend a lot of time on the cosmetic ones. Okay, FEMA agrees to fund $300 a week in extra Maryland unemployment benefits. Andy, what say you?
I mean, if it funds our economy and helps open doors in Washington County so that folks can get back on their feet, great. What I fear, though, is that we will use this and not to get back on our feet. But if this is what we need in order to open doors and get folks away from homelessness and not lose their job or not lose their houses, then okay.
Reggie?
Well, obviously it helps the state. But, you know, at some point, we as a country are going to have to pay the piper for all the money that we're flooding.
Yes, we
to
are.
the people. And we're stimulating the economy. It makes the stock market look well. But at some point, we're going to have to pay the piper.
Right. Exactly. Okay. NASA. Here's a good one. This is probably what I'm going to call our WTF topic, which is what the flip side. NASA alleges that asteroid could hit the Earth a day before the 2020 presidential election. Some would say that may be a blessing. Reggie, what do you say?
I say that all the bickering that we have going on about how we're going to vote could go away if we knew that that was going to happen, right? That's a non-issue at that point.
Okay. All right.
Of course it is, right? Yeah, bingo. It's my 2020 card. Of course it is. I hope it doesn't hit us. I mean, we have no control over that whatsoever.
No, we have no control over it, but it is interesting.
Yeah, bingo.
So, all right. Washington County tax income to county is higher than expected. Reggie, what say you?
I say any good news that we can have as a community right now, that's a good thing.
And to the point we made earlier, we're reporting it.
Right.
We're reporting good
news. I still don't think that we're out of the woods as an economy. It's good to have this news, but what's coming down the pipe, I think that we still have challenges ahead.
Yeah, it's an estimated repayment, so it could come, it could go, it could reduce. And more importantly, great for this year, but we have some challenges coming up front. So I would only sing that happy song for a little bit, because if that 14,000, whatever, 140,000, 113,000, something like that, let's pocket that and see where our economy is in this county in the next couple months. And if we got to use it, we got to use it. But let's be a little conservative about those.
Yeah,
shares.
let's take an extra minute on this one, because you know, I read the same thing and I thought the same thing that both of you have said. I think the time's going to come when we do have to pay the piper, and where is that money coming from? You know, are we going to? I mean, debt. At some point, that debt has to be paid back, and at some point, we need to stop amassing additional debt on top of it. You know, as a state, we don't have a choice but to have a balanced budget.
Right.
The federal government has broken out the credit card, and wow, have they gone on a shopping spree? And arguably, this is the kind of event where you needed to go on a shopping spree. But it makes me think about some of the events prior to this that maybe we didn't need to go, because the deficit was what, at 19 trillion before we started with COVID. Scary stuff in my view.
Yeah, it is. Except that you're right. If 80% of our folks who are working or were working aren't working, we have no economy.
Right.
We have to stimulate it somehow.
Absolutely.
And if that's what we have to do, then you're right. You break out the credit card. It's like, when I have to buy the water heater for my house, it hurts, but I have to do it because this is what we do.
Right.
But you're right. We need a better plan moving forward. And I'm not an economist, and I think smarter people than us or me would be able to figure that out in a way that doesn't bury us, but allows folks to literally not lose their homes.
Yeah. Without getting too deep into it, but from a market perspective, I mean, the market's up right now.
The market's up right now.
Is the outlook good?
The outlook is challenging, because if you take away about 10 technology companies, the market is down for the year. So you're being driven by the Apples and other large technology companies right now that are really moving those indexes. And the problem with when our economy suffers these shocks, and then when we have to deal with the debt down the road, it increases the gap between the have and the have-nots. So a lot of the social issues that we're talking about today, we won't have the dollars to be able to go in and rectify them, because then the county and the city and county and other places are going to have to make tough choices in regards to what programs to cut.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Lot to think about. All right. Speaking of technology companies, the U.S. is facing a significant back-to-school laptop shortage. You can't buy one, or you can buy a cheap one that probably is not going to suit your needs. I went online with a large computer manufacturer to buy one for my son who's entering college this year, and they said, "That's great, Mr. Miller. We'll have it to you sometime in October." Wait a minute, he starts school in 2 weeks. That's a problem. What are we going to do about that? I mean, we've ramped up production on all of these other things. I'm not sure how we ramp up the production on something that technology, that significant in terms of technology.
That's a tough one. My daughter received notice that her school was going to be moving towards Chromebooks, but they're on back order, so that they're going to start the year with iPads. And that's a struggle to kind of keep up with that. And again, that's increasing the gap between the have and have-nots, because families that have multiple computers in their home where the kids have something to use are going to be in a better situation than those families that are not and are having to rely on the iPads. That makes it a really, really tough circumstance on families.
Yeah, not to mention the availability of high-speed internet access. You have 3 kids and you have a 10 megabit connection. That can get tough really quick.
I wouldn't even say that. I would say the kids who are in places that don't have an internet connection and rely on the library, which is closed, in order to get their information. I agree with you completely, Reggie. I think it's a difficult, it's a huge challenge, and it's not just the haves and the have-nots, but it's really going to show a divide. If COVID has done anything, it's shown us that education is not equally free for everyone, and that some folks are already struggling. We have kids who aren't eating. We have kids on the east side of the state who have no internet, period. There's nothing there. How do those kids still receive that education so they can be successful and go to college if they choose? These are really hard questions, and what it's showing is that our education system, both K through 12 and in higher ed, we are not prepared for this. And if anything, it's making us create a strategy now so that we can be prepared moving forward, not stop there, and kind of prepare for the next big thing. We are woefully not prepared for exactly what's happening today, and that's to teach kids in places that don't have the access. And we've forgotten about them for a long time, and they are at the forefront right now.
Good point.
Thanks.
Excellent point.
It also speaks to our infrastructure, right?
100%.
You know, we haven't been doing the infrastructure spending, so now you have so many houses, especially in rural communities like this one, that do not have access to internet.
Well, and you know, that's a point several shows ago that I made. You know, we talk about the fact that we now have all these remote workers, and think about all the money we put into expanding lanes on every interstate, you know, across the country, and would we have been better served providing gigabit connections to every household rather than laying pavement and you know.
Or do both. I mean, it's not pie in my mind. We've got to create an infrastructure that serves both populations, because this is not going away. People will be working at home at a higher rate now than they have before.
Well, and part of that, and that's, you know, that's a good thing, I think.
Sure.
Because it really, and again, socially, I'm not sure it's a good thing. Your friend with Prime Time for Women, Bernadette, would tell us that social interaction is a
That's right.
critical part of life, and I completely agree with that. But I don't necessarily agree that we need to drive everybody from Hagerstown to Washington and put them in a, you know, 15-story office building to make them productive. I think, you know, I think that from an economic perspective, from a profitability perspective for companies, from an environmental perspective. I mean, we're seeing signs already that the COVID has had a positive effect on the environment. Although we're going to talk, I'm not sure it's this week, but we're going to talk, it's this week, about thousands being allowed to bypass environmental checks and balances because of COVID, which I had real trouble reading that one.
Yep.
But the bottom line is, it is going to be a long-term change. It is a full paradigm shift.
That's right.
And we have to face the new reality.
That's right. And we have to catch up.
Yes, we do. All right. Washington Goes Purple kicks off this week. What say you?
Oh, great. Anytime we can help people in recovery, sure, absolutely. Let's bring awareness to the folks who are at home. Let's do better things and great things in Washington County and get more services and more help. And if it takes a kickoff for an entire month, wonderful. Let's bring that throughout the entire year and help as many people as we can, even if it's only one person. That campaign's successful.
Yeah.
Yes, so my office is downtown, so I see all the purple going up, and you know, I know the events are being planned, and I'm hopeful because you know, there's been a lot of tragic deaths in the community of people that we all know in regards to that. So I'm hoping that gains some momentum and can make a difference in our community. And I saw that there was some state funds that came in for that organization, so hopefully they can put that to good use.
Yeah. I'll give you the last word on that. Coming up next, thousands allowed to bypass environmental controls based on COVID. We'll have that when we come back. We hope you'll be here as well. Welcome back. Well, an interesting article I read from actually AP this week suggested that thousands have been allowed to bypass environmental rules as a result of COVID. Now, there's a story that I didn't see on mainstream media. What I did see on some media outlets, which I appreciated, is the fact that COVID actually had a positive impact on the environment because we were all driving less. I have big problems with this. How is that something you turn off? Andy?
Yeah, you don't.
Well, obviously you do.
It sounds like to me that what we're doing is saying, well, I don't know how to fix this right now. There's not enough people. I don't have a strategy, so we're just not going to do it. And it's frightening. And these are the kinds of decisions that our leaders cannot make. And we need to make phone calls and do our activism in a positive way and call upon these folks to find better solutions than hurting our environment because we can't figure out what to do. I think it's hurtful, it's disgraceful, and we've got to make some phone calls to change. We have to change this.
I couldn't agree more. Reggie?
Well, it's going to be, I don't want to say interesting, but at some point, the effects of this are going to show up in the country, and whether it's this administration or the next are going to have to deal with it in regards to kind of, letting this slip under the rug.
We're literally setting ourselves up for a major, major failure.
Right.
So, and this is a hard fact. The Trump administration actually paved the way for the reduction in monitoring on March 26th. They were pressured by, guess who? The oil and gas industry. and I'm not saying the same wouldn't have happened if it was a democratically controlled White House, but it's not, so we have to place that blame where it is. And then apparently it kind of mushroomed from there. I guess my question, and what was not clear to me in any of the research that I did, is when are we putting these back in place? When are we returning to the controls?
Well, that's the whole problem, right? If we had to find a plan, right? There has to be an end date and an end time. And that's also my concern. What we've done simply is say, all right, great, we're going to stop monitoring and controlling. We have no idea when it's coming back online. And whoever is going to be in this administration next, or in the next 8 to 16 years, will have to deal with the fallout. I don't like things that are pushed so far ahead so you don't have to deal with them now. You will pay the piper one day,
Absolutely.
and it will be absolutely detrimental.
Well,
it's a travesty.
Yeah, and it's AKA the deficits. That's another piper paying that is down the road.
And this is going to cost the economy
That's right.
trillions of dollars
because at some point, it's going to be like the water situation that we had a while back, whatever the current version of this. Because what we have at this point, or what's reported at least, is that we are doing less monitoring at Texas refineries. Mm-hmm. We are doing less monitoring at an Army depot, who's that is dismantling warheads armed with nerve gas in Kentucky. Think about that one for a little bit. We have manure piling up in communities, and we have smokestacks and medical waste and sewage plants and chemical plants who are not having to do the level of reporting, and we are not doing the monitoring that we had previously done.
What I'm hearing is human life is not worth the time and energy to create a strategy that makes this stop.
Right.
That's what I hear.
And you want to talk about essential service.
Yeah.
If that is not an essential service, if that is not an essential function of government and the rest of us in this community, I'm hard pressed to figure out what is.
I have no argument against that. That's right.
How do we fix this? This is the one that I think we should be calling the Congress people about.
So let's do that. I mean, let's do that. I mean, if phone calls can help turn around healthcare, if protests and peacefully organization can help turn around other policies, let's do that for this one too. The worst that will happen, unfortunately, is it's going to stay the same. The best thing that could happen is that we reverse something. I'll take those chances.
Environmental issues normally do not have solutions put forward until there's a disaster.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's in this news cycle. Where would this fit in?
No, fair enough. But this is a man-made disaster, though. Yeah. This is us, or this administration, saying, "I'm going to let it happen."
And this is not one or two. This is 3,000 cases.
That's right.
In all 50 states is what the article suggested. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, because the Environmental Protection Agency says that the waivers do not authorize the recipients to exceed the pollution limits that are in place.
Yeah, and who checks that?
Well, it's an honor system.
Yeah, right. That's exactly my point. There's no accountability for that policy. You can't have a policy without accountability. It doesn't work.
Okay. So again, we don't have an understanding of when it's going to be put back in place, but we hope that it's put back in place soon.
We do.
All right. That's all the time we have tonight. We hope you will like us on Facebook. We hope you will follow us on Twitter. We hope you will send your feedbacks and suggestions to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That's feedback@theflipsidetv.com. Most importantly, we hope you will join us again next week for another visit to the Flip Side. Good night.